I held my daughter's photo one last time, heartbreaking knowing she didn't disappear by choice. Hannah wasn't gone. She was trapped in a web of lies and kidnapping while the police turned a blind eye. Her father, desperate, gave everything, even his life, to find her. This is not just a family story. If you think it is, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch more gripping, emotional, and shocking stories like this from us. Before everything fell apart, I believed family was the safest place, a refuge from all dangers. But that night when Hannah disappeared, all those beliefs shattered. Under the harsh fluorescence of LAX Terminal 4, the CCTV feed flickered like an old memory, refusing to fade. The timestamp blinked 8:03 p.m., November 8th, 2024. A woman in a navy blue windbreaker entered frame. She paused at the terminal entrance, dragging a dark gray hard-shell suitcase behind her. Hannah Kobayashi, 30, photographer from Maui, wore no makeup. Her face bore the drained look of someone who hadn't slept not because of exhaustion, but because sleep meant vulnerability. She stood just outside the security queue. In the footage, her movements weren't erratic, but deliberate. She adjusted the strap of her camera bag. Then she turned her head slowly, scanning the terminal like prey, unsure where the predator lay. A man bumped into her shoulder. She flinched, then apologized, barely audible in the background murmur. She didn't enter the line. She didn't even look at the check-in desk. She just stood. The audio overlay crackled in a recorded voicemail she sent to her younger brother at 7:42 p.m., half an hour before she was last seen. "Hey, it's me. Don't freak out, okay? But something's wrong. I think I got tricked financially, like seriously tricked. But I'm gonna fix it. I just need to disappear for a while. Please don't call the cops. Just trust me. I love you." There was a pause. The sound of her exhaling sharply, as if bracing against her own words. "Tell Dad I'm okay, and if you can tell him I'm sorry." Static. Cut to black. Then a single click. A camera flash. But it wasn't Hannah's lens this time. It was her father's old Olympus, sitting on the kitchen table back home in Maui, dusty, untouched for months. A trembling hand reached across the table. Fingers calloused, aged, slow gripped the edge of the device. The man holding it was Ryan Kobayashi, Hannah's father. Mid-60s former wedding photographer, now retired and broken in all the quiet ways men rarely admit to. His eyes were bloodshot. His gray t-shirt hung off him like defeat. The camera lay in his palm like something sacred. Beside him, a faded family photo leaned against the wall. Hannah at 12, grinning wide, missing a front tooth. Her mother, gone now from cancer, was laughing in mid-frame, hair whipping in the wind. Ryan stood behind them, in that photo arms around both, smiling. The kind of smile a man wears when he still believes the world listens. Ryan picked up his phone, opened the last voicemail again, played it, again and again. "Tell Dad I'm sorry." The words stuck to him like a drowning weight. Cut back to the terminal. Another angle, another camera. Hannah now walked toward the far corner of the terminal, away from the security gates. Her pace quickened. She looked over her shoulder twice. She passed a janitor, a crying toddler, a man in a black hoodie staring into his phone. No one noticed her disappear. Back in Maui, rain pelted the roof. Ryan stood by the window, a storm shutter half closed. He hadn't shaved in days. The phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. He didn't answer. He opened his daughter's Instagram account. Last post, a photo of a seagull perched on a railing, sunset behind it. Caption, "We never know when the sky will change." Posted 6:02 p.m., November 8th, 2 hours before she vanished. The plane she was supposed to board, LAX to JFK, departed at 8:35 p.m. On time. Her name was on the manifest. But she never scanned her boarding pass, never walked through the gate. The camera panned slowly across the empty waiting area where Hannah should have been. A mother rocked her baby in the background. A man in a business suit slouched in a chair, headphones in. Somewhere a child laughed, but Hannah was gone. Fade in Ryan now, holding a yellow envelope. Inside it, printouts of every bank transaction Hannah had made in the last month. She had emptied her savings. Nearly $40,000. Gone. He read the descriptions out loud to no one's Silver Peak investment entry fee, $15,000. Private coaching plan, $7,800. Crypto wire transfer. 12,350. His hands shook. The ink blurred. Why would she? He whispered. What did they promise her? Back to airport security footage, now slowed to 30% speed. A side angle from a parking lot exit. A white Honda Civic pulled up to the curb. Hannah opened the rear door and got in. She never looked back. The taillights blinked, then disappeared into LAX's endless arteries of concrete and shadow. No license plate, no facial ID. Cut to black. The next sound we hear is a jet engine rising, roaring like a coming storm. The camera rises above the runway. Dozens of planes parked taxiing, taking off. Blinking lights stretch into the horizon. And under that roar, we hear the voice of Ryan again this time, from a video blog he started 2 weeks later. His voice dry and calm, but broken in places. My name is Ryan Kobayashi. My daughter Hannah vanished from LAX on November 8th. They say she left on her own. That she wasn't kidnapped. That she just walked away. But that's not the girl I raised. She doesn't run. She doesn't vanish. Something happened that night, and I will find her. I swear to God I will. He chokes on the last word. Not because of doubt, but because of the unbearable certainty that no one else would. The camera lingers on the blinking cursor in the YouTube upload window. Title: Where is Hannah Kobayashi? He clicks publish. Outside, the night wraps the house in silence. Only the sound of the rain remains steady, soft like a lullaby for ghosts. Fade to black. White text slowly appears on screen. November 8th, 2024. Hannah Kobayashi disappeared from Los Angeles International Airport. She has not been seen since. One final flash, this time from Hannah's own camera. A photograph appears, a blurry underexposed shot of the terminal ceiling. Frame tilted, focus lost, as if taken in panic. The only photo she left behind that night. Then total darkness, then silence. Under the golden light of a Maui sunset, the island seemed to hold its breath. The waves rolled in with rhythm patient and precise, just like the old Olympus OM1 in Ryan Kobayashi's weathered hands. He adjusted the focus ring with the practiced ease of a man who'd shot weddings, births, and farewells for over 3 decades. But today, he wasn't the photographer. Today, his 12-year-old daughter was. Look at the shadows, he whispered, pointing toward the coconut trees, swaying against the horizon. Where they fall tells the story. Young Hannah squinted through the viewfinder, her dark hair frizzy from the humidity. She clicked the shutter too early. Too fast, he said gently. You've got to wait. You have to feel the light. She laughed. Feel it. Yeah, like it's music. You don't rush the last note. That was the first time she caught a lens flare intentionally. The first time she saw how a color could bleed into another and turn the ordinary into something holy. That evening, they walked the entire beach until the sky turned bruised and purple. When they got home, she wrote in her notebook, "Today I made light mine." Ryan never told her how that line broke him a little inside. He knew already she would outshine him one day. And that was exactly what he had hoped for. That was a long time ago. Now, the beach is empty. His camera sits untouched in its case. And there are no sunsets being photographed, only the long gray shadows of grief creeping across every room of their house. Inside their modest home in Maui, the living room smells faintly of old wood and unopened mail. The air is too still. Ryan sits in the armchair he never used to sit in Hannah's chair, just to feel closer to where she once sprawled out after long hikes editing her photos with her laptop on her knees. The walls are lined with her framed work, a child chasing pigeons, the silhouette of a musician at dusk, a blurred figure leaping into the sea, but none of those images seem real anymore. They feel like ghosts, frozen laughter in glass. Across the hall, Hannah's mother Emiko is seated at the dining table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in front of her. She hasn't spoken much in days. Her eyes are swollen, but she doesn't cry in front of others. She just folds laundry that no one wears anymore and leaves plates of food on the table long after everyone has stopped eating. Their youngest son, Daniel, 17, hasn't been home in 2 nights. He dropped out of high school a week after Hannah vanished. Said he was done pretending. Now he lives mostly in the garage, blasting music through noise-canceling headphones, sketching graffiti-like figures onto the concrete floor with charcoal sticks. Ryan tried talking to him once, just once. The boy turned away, said only, "She's not coming back. There's no music in the house anymore. No sound of the shutter. No laughter from the kitchen. Just the steady ticking of a clock Ryan forgot to remove from the wall one Hannah gifted him years ago. The ticking never stops, even in the dark." In the small study next to the kitchen, Ryan sits with a leather-bound journal. The pages are messy, scribbled with dates, times, questions, places. Leads that went nowhere. Rumors he chased only to find silence at the end of every road. On one page, he's written the same sentence 6 times. "She wouldn't leave us." He underlines it again, then writes slowly, "I don't believe she walked away. Someone took her. Someone watched her. Someone waited. My daughter is not a ghost, and I won't treat her like one." There's a picture taped to the next page. Not one of her famous photographs. It's a Polaroid Hannah as a kid, missing teeth arms thrown around her dad's neck, both of them soaked from a surprise rainstorm. Behind them, the sun breaks through the clouds like forgiveness. Ryan has circled the corner of the photo in red ink. The date reads November 8th, 2007, 17 years to the day before she vanished. Was that coincidence? Or was it her way of marking something? A quiet signal. His mind spirals again. He slams the journal shut, guilt rising in his throat like bile. Across the table, Hannah's phone sits on a charger, still locked. They couldn't unlock it. Apple refused. Said only law enforcement could. And LAPD had already labeled her case as voluntary absence. That phrase keeps Ryan awake at night. Voluntary. They think she chose this. He knows his daughter. She wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. The news outlets moved on within days. Photographer disappears from LAX. Possible financial scam. A 2-minute segment sandwiched between a weather update and a celebrity breakup. The world barely blinked. But inside this house, time has fractured. The calendar remained stuck on November. Thanksgiving never came. Christmas lights were never unpacked. Emiko keeps baking Hannah's favorite scones every Sunday and sets aside a plate that no one touches. Daniel carved her name into the underside of the dining table. Hannah, all caps the H, carved so deep the knife left a groove. Ryan hasn't opened the door to her bedroom in 12 days. He tells himself he will tomorrow. He won't. He reopens the journal again. Writes, "What kind of world lets someone vanish in a crowd?" and calls it freedom. That evening, Ryan receives a call from a former student of Hannah's, a girl from a community center photography class she taught last year. The girl says she saw Hannah on Reddit. Someone posted an image that looked like her from Tijuana, Mexico. The girl sounds scared. Guilty. She was with a guy, she says. He didn't look right. Like she was flinching. Ryan hangs up and prints the image. It's blurry. The woman in the photo has Hannah's hair, but she's thinner. Wearing clothes too big, her eyes look past the camera vacant. He stares at it all night. By morning, he tapes it beside the Polaroid in his journal, then writes beneath it, "They didn't take a victim. They took my child." The next entry, "They think we're broken, but we're not broken. We're buried, and we're digging our way back up." He walks into the living room. Emiko is still at the table. Daniel has returned to sleep on the couch. Ryan stands in the doorway and says nothing, just watches his family fade in and out of the morning light like the negative of a photo still waiting to be developed, still waiting for someone to bring the image into focus. Under the indifferent glare of overhead lights, the Los Angeles Police Department smelled like old paper bad coffee and apathy polished to a bureaucratic shine. Ryan Kobayashi sat across from a detective who didn't make eye contact for the first 4 minutes of their meeting. The room wasn't an interrogation chamber, but it felt like one. The walls were a muted gray, the windows too high to look out of, and the clock ticked like a countdown Ryan didn't understand yet. His wife Emiko sat beside him, her hands folded so tightly in her lap they looked like one clenched fist. Daniel hadn't come, said it was pointless. Across from them, Detective Marquez finally spoke. "We've reviewed airport surveillance. Your daughter entered the terminal at approximately 8:03 p.m. November 8th. Ryan nodded once. Then what? She was seen moving through public areas, didn't approach any ticket counters or TSA checkpoints. At 8:18 p.m., she exited through the west corridor and entered the short-term parking lot. At 8:24, she entered a vehicle. That's the last confirmed sighting. She got in a car, Ryan repeated. Whose car? We don't know. The plate was obscured. Was it a rideshare taxi? Not that we can confirm. Ryan leaned forward. So she just vanishes. You're telling me you don't know who she left with, where they went, or why she didn't board her flight? That's correct. The words dropped like sandbags. Emiko's voice was barely a whisper. You don't have anything else? Detective Marquez paused, then pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. We have this. Inside was a printed statement signed by a psychologist working for the department. It read, Subject is 30 years old, legally an adult. Financial stress indicated in text communications. Signs of voluntary disappearance. No evidence of abduction, no physical struggle, no indication of foul play. At this time, we do not consider Hannah Kobayashi a victim of a crime. Ryan didn't read past the second sentence. He closed the folder slowly. So you're not looking for her? We filed her as a voluntary missing adult. If she contacts us and says she's fine, that's the end of it. She didn't contact you. She contacted her family. She said something was wrong. She said she was sorting it out. She said she was scared. She also said, don't call the police, which we take seriously. Ryan stood up too fast. His chair skidded back, echoing like a gunshot in the still room. She was coached. Someone told her what to say. Mr. Kobayashi. She doesn't disappear like this. She doesn't run. You think she just left? For what, a vacation? She vanished in one of the most secure airports in the world, and you want me to believe she chose that. The detective sighed. We can reopen the case if there's evidence of a crime. Ryan stared at him silent, then walked out. No one followed. The camera would track him now, if this were a film. From behind down the long corridor, his frame shrinking as he passed through the layers of red tape and indifference. His shoulders hunched lower with every step. His face like stone, too tired to rage, too heartbroken to collapse. Outside, the city roared. LAX traffic snarled around honking cabs and late flights. The world spun forward. But Ryan stood on the sidewalk as if gravity had given up on him. Back home in Maui, he sat in Hannah's room that night for the first time in 2 weeks. It was like walking into a shrine. Her bed was still unmade from her last visit. A yellow hoodie hung from the doorknob. Her perfume bottle Ocean Mist and citrus sat half full on the dresser. He didn't touch anything. He just sat on the floor and stared at her bulletin board. Dozens of notes were pinned there. Quotes she liked. To-do lists. A receipt from a gallery in New York. One photo stood out, a printed image of her and a young woman with green hair, both laughing over iced coffee. On the back, a name, Maya Tran. He found Maya on Instagram within the hour, messaged her. She replied that night. When they finally spoke, her voice cracked before she even said hello. I tried to tell someone, she said. I didn't know who to call. Maya just tell me everything. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, but the last time we talked, she was really off. Like, paranoid. She said she'd been offered this exclusive financial mentorship program through a photographer's group. They promised her she could triple her income in a year. She wired them money, thousands. How much? Over 30 grand, I think. She told me she used up her savings. And then she said things got weird. Like, threatening weird. She started getting texts from different numbers, all anonymous. Some of them said stuff like, don't speak about the program, or, you've signed the contract you're in now. Did she go to the police? No. She said she was embarrassed. She said she could fix it herself. Ryan closed his eyes. Did she ever mention Mexico? A pause. Then yes. But I thought she was joking. What did she say? She said, if I disappear, tell people I'm not in America anymore. And then she laughed. But it wasn't funny. Maya began to cry. I didn't think it was real. Until I saw the headline. Ryan promised her he'd stay in touch, then hung up. The next morning, he called LAPD again. Left 4 voicemails, no return call. He emailed the detective, attached a transcript of the call with Maya. The only reply? Thank you for the information. At this time, the case status remains unchanged. He printed the message, folded it in half, tucked it inside his journal. Then he opened his laptop and requested all public CCTV footage from LAX for the night of November 8th. He was denied, so he filed a FOIA request. While he waited, he did the next logical thing. He called a private investigator. The man who answered had a smoker's voice and a skeptical tone. You're saying she just walked out? She got in a car, I don't know whose. Any threats before she left? Her friend thinks so, but no formal report. You're looking for someone who doesn't want to be found, Mr. Kobayashi. That's a whole different game. No, I'm looking for someone who was told not to be found. The investigator paused, then said, Send me what you've got. I'll take a look. 3 days later, Ryan received a package. Inside was a flash drive, a folder labeled Exit Footage. He opened it. Saw the same sequence LAPD had described. Hannah exiting the terminal, walking calmly, not panicked, not rushed, but alert, focused. At 8:24 p.m., a car pulled up. She opened the back door, climbed in, never looked back. Ryan paused the frame, zoomed in. No license plate, no face on the driver, but something else. In Hannah's right hand, almost out of frame, a white envelope, thick, unmarked. He stared at it for a full minute, then wrote in his journal. It wasn't just money, it was leverage. He flipped the page and added, This isn't a disappearance, it's a transaction. That night he sat by the window and didn't sleep. Just listened to the wind, just watched the horizon. And somewhere beyond the veil of bureaucracy and bad lighting, he swore he could still see her face in the flicker of the streetlight, watching, waiting, begging someone to notice. Under a dull ceiling fan in a shared apartment in San Diego, Olivia Cho replayed the same voice memo 3 times before she could bring herself to respond. Her hands shook not from cold, but from something deeper, something crawling under her skin. The message was only 10 seconds long. The voice was cracked, whispered, on the edge of panic. Liv, it's me. I don't know how long I have. I'm in Tijuana. Don't call the police. They'll kill me. I messed up. I messed up so bad. Please tell my dad I didn't want this. Click! No signature, no timestamp. But Olivia knew the voice. She'd known it since art school, late nights developing film in a shared darkroom, long drives with Hannah reading poetry out loud like a dare. That voice was softer now, hollow, like it had been scraped against pavement and stitched back together. She called Ryan Kobayashi that same night. I need to show you something, she said. But you have to promise me something first. What? Promise you won't stop. Ryan didn't hesitate. I already can't. They met the next morning at a coffee shop just north of the border. Olivia brought her phone a folder of screenshots and the shaky kind of hope people carry like broken glass. She played the message for him. Watched his face change shape, tightening first, then collapsing into something unspeakable. There's more, she said. Texts. She unlocked her phone, scrolled back 3 weeks. Hannah, don't trust the number I called you from. Hannah, I'm somewhere near Zona Norte. Hannah, they took my passport. Hannah, I can't feel my hands. Tell my mom I didn't lie. Hannah, if you go to the cops, they'll find me faster and kill me faster. Hannah, I said yes to something I didn't understand. Hannah, it's not a school, it's a trap. I'm not alone. Olivia stopped there. She only sent texts every few days, like she didn't have consistent access to her phone. Some came from Mexican numbers, others were spoofed U.S. numbers. One came from a cafe's Wi-Fi IP address. Ryan didn't speak. His eyes were locked on one sentence, the one about her hands. She's been trafficked, he said. Olivia blinked, tears starting again. I didn't want to believe it. At first I thought maybe she joined some commune, some off-grid thing. Maybe she was just spiraling. But that last message? She turned her phone screen to him. One final message, time-stamped 5:43 a.m. 3 days ago. If they find out I texted, they'll sell me. I'm a product now. Ryan read it twice, then a third time. His breath slowed. He didn't cry. Not yet. His grief was harder than that, stiff, calcified. Why didn't you go to the police? I tried. I brought the texts. The voice memo. They said it wasn't enough. That she's over 18. That if she says not to involve law enforcement, they can't do anything. Ryan laughed hollow, of course, because fear looks too much like free will. He drove straight home. Didn't turn on the radio, didn't eat, didn't speak. Once back in Hannah's room, he opened his laptop and typed in 3 words: Tijuana missing women. Hundreds of results. Faces blurred, articles untranslated, red links, surveillance photos. Most stories stopped mid-sentence, no resolution, no retrieval. He added another phrase, Zona Norte trafficking. Now it was different. The search results weren't articles, they were survivor blogs, message boards, Reddit threads filled with horror. Posts with titles like, she thought she was going to a job interview. They used love bombing, then isolation, then vanishing. If they take your passport, you belong to them. He read a first-hand account from a woman who escaped after being locked in a motel for 9 weeks. She wrote, the biggest lie is that you'll be allowed to leave. The second biggest lie is that anyone is coming for you. Ryan gripped the arms of the chair so hard, his knuckles turned white. He switched tabs, typed U.S. citizens abducted in Mexico, FBI jurisdiction, more red tape. He called a number listed on one of the Reddit survivor support threads. A woman answered. Her voice was tired, wary. But she listened. He told her everything. At the end, she said, we believe you, but the system won't. Then you need to find someone inside. Inside what? The networks. Someone who knows the handlers, the spots they use, the drop points. Ryan wrote every word down. That night, he printed out every one of Hannah's text messages that Olivia had forwarded, taped them one by one to the wall of his study, arranging them like a crime board. He circled words product passport Zona Norte, not alone. The room began to look like a detective's war room. But Ryan wasn't a cop. He was a father. That made everything harder. It made every lead more personal, every silence more damning. He tried contacting the U.S. consulate, left a message. No reply. He tried a non-profit based in El Paso. They said they only worked with confirmed rescue cases. Everyone needed proof. But Hannah was somewhere where proof got buried with the victims. At midnight, he stared at one particular message for over an hour. I said yes to something I didn't understand. That sentence played in his head over and over. What did she say yes to? He remembered suddenly a voicemail from 2 months before she vanished. He hadn't thought much of it then. Hannah was rambling excited. Hey, Dad, so get this. I got invited to this workshop thing for creatives who want to become wealth-free. It's like this mastermind group, but also like kinda culty. I mean, not really, but kind of. They said I was chosen. Crazy, right? She had laughed. Now he was shaking. He searched his email for the phrase wealth-free. Hit a PDF brochure sent from Hannah's Gmail, The Obsidian Path. A retreat for visionaries seeking sovereignty from capitalist enslavement. In the bottom corner, a small black diamond logo. No address, no contact name. He Googled the phrase Obsidian Path. Nothing on page 1. But page 5 held a blog post anonymous. It read, my sister joined Obsidian Path. She was never the same. She left for a business opportunity in Mexico. We haven't seen her since. That night, Ryan didn't sleep. He opened a notebook, started drawing lines. From Obsidian Path to Zona Norte, from missing women to Hannah, from texts to silence. And in the center he wrote, they made her disappear. Now I make them visible. He pinned her photo in the middle of the wall. And below it, in red ink, wrote, she's not a ghost, she's a prisoner. And I will not let her die invisible. The screen fades to black. A single line appears. No one believed she was in danger, except her father. Under the bleached silence of 2:47 a.m., Los Angeles International Airport pulsed like a restless beast, its arteries of concrete and steel breathing out diesel neon and loneliness. Ryan Kobayashi walked alone near the southern perimeter fence where the planes rose like ghosts above the sleeping city. The sidewalk was cracked. The wind carried faint echoes of flight announcements and forgotten goodbyes. He wore a navy windbreaker. Not because it was cold, it wasn't, but because it still smelled faintly of his daughter. A scent he couldn't quite name. Maybe lemongrass, maybe fear. In his hand, folded so tightly the corners had begun to curl, was a photograph. Hannah, age 7, standing on the black rocks of Lahaina Beach, barefoot, laughing eyes squinting at the sun, arms flung wide. The sky behind her looked like forever. He held the photo like armor. Or maybe like confession. His steps were steady but slow. The kind of rhythm people walk with when there's no destination, just movement. Just gravity and grief. He passed under the orange haze of a busted streetlight. No one noticed him. No one ever noticed the grieving ones. In his pocket was a small battered voice recorder. He'd used it once to document lectures on composition, the interplay between light and time. Tonight it had only one purpose. He clicked it on, lifted it close. "Hannah, it's Dad." He paused, swallowed. "You used to hate the dark. Remember, when you were little and we lost power in the hurricane, you made me sit in the closet with you just holding your hand until it passed. You said it wasn't the dark that scared you. It was not knowing if anyone else was still there." Another pause. "I'm still here." The wind picked up, "But I can't keep holding your hand from this far away anymore. I've tried. God, I've tried. But they won't listen, Hannah. They won't look for you. Not the right way. And I don't have any more doors to knock on." His voice cracked. "You always said I saw things in people's faces that weren't really there. That maybe I was too hopeful. Maybe. But I see you. I see you everywhere. And I don't know how much longer I can hold that picture in my head without breaking it." He held the photo up to his chest like a prayer. "If I go now, maybe they'll pay attention. Maybe they'll finally see you. Maybe someone will finally believe you're worth finding." Far in the distance, a freight train moaned through the night like a wound. Ryan's footsteps slowed. "This isn't about giving up. It's about giving you back the voice they took. If I can't find you, then maybe my silence can scream loud enough to shake something loose." The recorder clicked off. At dawn, a jogger found him near the edge of the Amtrak rail line, 100 yards east of the terminal's auxiliary lot. He wasn't bloody. He wasn't broken in any visible way. He was sitting upright against the chain-link fence, his head resting back like he'd fallen asleep under the fading stars. In his lap, the photo of Hannah, still warm from his hands. Tucked into the breast pocket of his windbreaker, a printed email. It was Hannah's final message to Olivia. The one that read, "I'm a product now." That's all it said, just that. But when LAPD arrived, their tone had changed. Suddenly, they were reviewing new evidence. Suddenly, the term voluntary had a bitter taste. Suddenly, a father's death was no longer a footnote. News broke within hours. Local channels, then national. Father of missing photographer, found dead near LAX. Did LAPD ignore signs of trafficking? Never find Hannah trends nationwide. Within 12 hours, the hashtag had over 5 million views. Strangers from Ohio to Jakarta reposted her face, her story, her laughter frozen in frame. Celebrities began weighing in. Activists. Survivor accounts resurfaced. The conversation widened. One tweet in particular shattered something open. Ryan Kobayashi didn't die looking for his daughter. He died screaming into a system that wouldn't listen. Listen now. At Find Hannah. At the family home in Maui, Emiko sat with the folded jacket Ryan had worn. Her hand rested over the breast pocket. Over the last words Hannah had written. She didn't cry. She'd done that already. This was something colder. Something that sat between mourning and rage. Daniel returned home without speaking. He turned off his phone, went to the garage, spray-painted a mural of his father's face, eyes wide mouth open, not in terror, but in defiance. Below it, 3 words, "She's still out there." That night, Emiko opened Hannah's closet for the first time in months. Inside was an old shoebox filled with negatives, thousands of tiny reversed worlds. She held them to the light. So many faces, so many women, so many shadows no one ever developed. And she whispered to no one in particular, "We see you now." Under a flickering cafe sign in the heart of Guadalajara, a man named Diego Cienfuegos uploaded a 23-minute video to his YouTube channel. He'd never meant to be an investigator. He reviewed paranormal documentaries and once got 20,000 views on a video debunking a fake ghost sighting at a gas station. But this wasn't about ghosts. This was about a real woman who looked far too alive to be ignored and far too hunted to be safe. The video was titled, "Is This the Missing American Woman from LAX?" Found in Guadalajara Market. In the opening shot, The screen played low-resolution CCTV footage from a vendor's security system dated 2 days prior. The footage captured a narrow alley leading into the back stalls of a bustling night market. And there she was, a woman in a faded hoodie black baseball cap pulled low, moving fast, but not hurried. Every few steps, she paused to glance behind her. Frame by frame, Diego had slowed her down, zoomed in, enhanced. Cross-referenced it with news photos of Hannah Kobayashi from 2023, an award ceremony in Maui, a portrait series in Brooklyn, a casual selfie from Big Island. Diego said it plainly. Look at the jawline, the scar near the temple, the way she walks a slight inward tilt on the left leg. That's her. Or it's someone who has no business looking exactly like her and hiding in this part of town. The comment section exploded within hours. And within 24 hours, Emiko Kobayashi watched the video on a cracked iPad, sitting at her kitchen table alone. She didn't cry. She called a man named Adrian Suarez instead. Suarez wasn't an FBI agent. He wasn't a bounty hunter. He didn't wear leather jackets or speak in vague riddles. He was clean-shaven, detail-obsessed, and fluent in 4 dialects of Spanish, including one used exclusively by a criminal faction near the Mexico-Guatemala border. He picked up on the first ring. "You're calling about Hannah," he said. "Yes. I've seen the video. I was waiting for your call." Within 48 hours, Emiko and Daniel were on a plane to Mexico City. From there, Suarez drove them to Guadalajara in a gray van with government plates and a glove compartment full of burner phones. They said nothing on the ride. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that could be said would collapse them too early. In the van, Suarez briefed them. She was spotted near San Juan de Dios. That's not a place you get lost in. That's a place you go if someone tells you to be there. "Human trafficking," Daniel asked. "It's not trafficking in the way movies show it," Suarez replied. "It's coercion, psychological breakdown, isolation, fear. They don't chain you up. They just make you believe the world you knew doesn't exist anymore." They arrived at a cheap hotel 2 blocks from the market. It didn't take cash at the desk, only pesos in exact change. The room smelled like bleach and mothballs. Suarez set up 3 laptops, each connected to hidden cameras placed throughout the nearby alleyways. That night they watched. Hours passed. Nothing. Until 2:03 a.m. A silhouette emerged on the north feed, same hoodie, same hat, thin, head down. She passed under a street lamp. It was her. "Hannah," Daniel gasped. Emiko stood frozen. "She's alive," Emiko whispered. Suarez leaned forward. "She's not just alive. She's moving with intent. She's avoiding corners. She knows this place. She's not lost." Over the next 4 nights, they tracked her through back alleys, roof cameras, and hidden corridor feeds. She never stayed in one place longer than 8 hours. She never looked anyone in the eye. But she always moved with purpose. One night, they followed her to a run-down motel near the outskirts of the city. Suarez bribed the night manager to show them the guest book. Hannah hadn't signed it. But someone using the name Hannah Koba had paid in cash for room 8 4 nights straight. They pulled the feed from the hallway cam. At 4:12 a.m. that morning, Hannah stepped out for 10 minutes, then returned with a plastic bag full of canned food and bottled water. On her right wrist was a thin purple string bracelet, similar to those worn in underground communes they'd seen in previous investigations. Inside the motel lobby, Suarez leaned in close to Emiko. "She's surviving, but she's not safe. What do we do?" He looked at the screen again. "We wait until she's alone. Then we take her. No cops. Absolutely no cops. Not yet. If she's under watch, even from a distance, they'll know before we do." The next night, it rained. The alleys bled with neon reflections. They watched the feed from a nearby fruit stall's external camera. Hannah stepped into frame drenched, shaking. She reached under her jacket and pulled out a slip of paper. She tucked it into the crack of a wooden post. Then she turned and disappeared into the fog. Daniel ran to retrieve it. By the time he returned, his hands were trembling. On the paper was a drawing, a simple outline of a camera. Next to it, one word: "Help!" Underneath another: "Not safe." That night, Suarez laid out a plan. If she's sending notes, she knows she's being watched. But she still has enough will to ask for help. That means whoever has her doesn't completely own her mind. Not yet. "What does that mean?" Daniel asked. It means we get one shot. He passed them both burner phones. Tomorrow night. 3:10 a.m. She always stops at the same bakery stall. We intercept. No words, just recognition, just presence. That's the only way we bring her back from whatever they told her was real. No sleep, no more waiting. And just beyond the window, a city kept its secrets stitched beneath layers of heat, shadow, and silence. But one girl still moved through the fog, eyes open, heart caged but burning. And the people who once lost her, they were finally closing in. The message came through at 3:41 a.m., just as Adrian Suarez was cataloging new footage from the fruit stall camera. The burner phone buzzed once, then again. No caller ID, no number. Just a gray block of text glowing against the dark screen. Stop looking for her. She's not who you think she is anymore. He read it twice, then tossed the phone onto the table like it had burned him. Emiko looked up from the map she was marking. What is it? Suarez didn't answer. He stood across the room and closed the window, then the curtains, then unplugged the Wi-Fi router. He spoke low and slow, like someone who knew he was now inside the story instead of outside it. They know we're here. Daniel straightened up. How? Doesn't matter. What matters is they've started talking, which means we've gotten close. Too close. He turned the phone around and showed them the message. Daniel's face went hard. What does that even mean, she's not who we think she is? Suarez narrowed his eyes. It's manipulation. Psychological warfare. They want us to think she's complicit, broken, or worse, converted. Emiko stood, but she sent the drawing. She did. Suarez nodded. And that means she's still in there. But they want us to believe she's beyond saving. He paused. They're scared. That night, they went deeper. Suarez arranged a meeting with a local informant, someone who had once moved girls through the same Guadalajara alley system and had since turned on the network. He wouldn't meet at a cafe or hotel. Only one place, an abandoned laundry warehouse at the edge of Santa Teresita, where the walls were half burned and the ceiling moaned with rust. They arrived at midnight. The man was already there, early 50s, rail-thin cigarette burning down to the filter, voice like gravel and regret. She's still alive, he said, but not for long. Suarez didn't flinch. Where? They move them every 72 hours. Keep them disoriented. Keep people from catching patterns. Where is she now? He hesitated, then lit another cigarette with the end of the first. There's a compound. Not far, not official. They call it La Camera, because it used to be a photo shop. Now it's where they develop girls. Daniel stepped forward. What does that mean? The man stared through him. It means they strip the identity away, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but obedience. Suarez snapped. Where is it? The man scribbled an address on a napkin. But you didn't get it from me. That was all he said. They left immediately. No police, no backup. Just a rusted-out sedan, a burner phone, a flashlight, and a plan that wasn't really a plan. The compound was buried behind a wall of rusted tin and graffiti. The only sign of life was a single flickering bulb over a steel door. Suarez knocked once, then again. Nothing. He pulled the bolt cutters from the trunk. They went in. Inside, the space was damp. Mold curled up the walls. Fluorescent lights buzzed like insects. The air reeked of bleach and ammonia cover scents. There were two hallways. One led to a storage room, the other to a series of doors, metal, padlocked, numbered. They moved fast but quiet. Room 3 was empty. Room 4 was storage. Room 5 locked. Suarez picked it. Inside, a mattress on the floor, a pile of clothes, and a plastic crate full of journals, notes, sketches. Emiko saw the handwriting and gasped. Hannah. Then footsteps, voices, Spanish, rapid, angry. Daniel whispered, they're back. Suarez barked out the side window, now. But Emiko froze. No, she's here. I know she is. Then a scream, muffled, far away. Daniel ran. They found her in the next room, curled in a corner behind a rusted shelf, knees pulled to her chest, arms shaking. She was thinner than in the video, her face pale and hollow, hair chopped unevenly, the purple bracelet still on her wrist. She didn't speak when Daniel said her name. She flinched, looked past him. Her eyes moved like glass, reflecting light, but not letting anything through. Then she whispered, "Don't touch me. They said you'd come, but it's not real. You're not real." Emiko stepped forward slowly. "It's real, Hannah. We're real. Hannah blinked, looked again. Mom, that one word broke something. For a moment her shoulders slumped. Her fists uncurled. She moved to stand, but gunshots rang out from the front. Suarez grabbed her arm. Move, now. The next 90 seconds blurred, screaming, running. A man with a crowbar swinging wild in the hall. Daniel tackling him. Suarez dragging Hannah through the back exit through an alley flooded with rainwater and trash. Someone chased them, shouting shooting. They ran, down 3 alleys, across a trash-strewn bridge, through an abandoned taco stand, into the waiting van. Doors slammed shut, tires screeched. Hannah sobbed once, then went silent. No one spoke until they hit the highway. Then Hannah whispered, "They said if I ever left, they'd erase me." Emiko held her tighter. Daniel looked back through the window, eyes locked on the dark shrinking behind them. Suarez drove with one hand bleeding from the knuckles. He said nothing. But in the rearview mirror, for the first time, Hannah met his eyes. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. They kept the van dark as it moved along the highway. Hannah sat in the back, wedged between Emiko and Daniel, her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles pale, breathing shallow and uncertain. She didn't speak for nearly an hour, but no one rushed her. No one asked questions. They just existed together, in the heavy silence, each carrying a different version of hell. It wasn't until they crossed the state border and the city lights faded behind them that she broke. "I didn't even know his name," she said. Daniel turned toward her, unsure. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor of the van. "The one who recruited me. I thought I did. But it was probably fake. Everything was fake." They listened. "It started with a message," she continued. "He said he saw my work, my photography. He said it had emotional currency, that it deserved to be seen. Said I wasn't thinking big enough, that real artists didn't just create, they invested." She glanced at her mother barely. "I wasn't stupid," she said quickly. "It didn't feel like a scam. Not at first. He used all the right words, knew what to say, knew when to flatter and when to challenge. He said I was stuck in scarcity thinking, that I had to learn wealth from within before I'd ever see it outside." Daniel muttered, "Sounds like a cult." Hannah nodded slowly. "But they don't wear robes. They don't chant. They use spreadsheets and praise and shame when it's time." The van hit a bump. She blinked but didn't stop. There was a retreat. In Tulum. I didn't tell anyone. I was embarrassed. I used what I had left in my savings, figured it was just a few days of lectures. The place was beautiful. Oceanfront. Lots of mirrors. She laughed, but it didn't sound like humor. First night, they took our phones. Said it was part of the mental detox. Second day, they introduced debt as ritual. They asked us to write down every dollar we'd ever wasted. Then they made us burn the paper. Said that debt was energy, and we had to sacrifice something equal to it to cleanse ourselves. Daniel grimaced. "You mean money?" She shook her head. "No, that came next. At first, it was video testimonials about how free we felt, how grateful. But then they started giving us lines, feeding us stories. And if you refused to say it on camera, they said you weren't ready to move up." Suarez, driving, glanced in the mirror. "Did they record you?" She didn't answer right away. Then yes, every day. They made us say we'd left our families, that we wanted to be free, that no one was forcing us to stay. We were told to smile, to thank them. Some of us even cried grateful tears. But it was all scripted. She stared out the window into nothing. I remember standing in front of that camera, and I couldn't feel my feet. Couldn't feel my own face. I looked into the lens and something inside me just shut off. She paused. Her voice broke. I said, "I don't want to go back to the U.S. I said, "My family doesn't understand me." I said, "Please don't come looking for me." Her hands shook. And the worst part is, I almost believed it. After enough days, you don't know where your thoughts end and theirs begin. Emiko touched her shoulder. "You don't have to keep," but Hannah raised a hand gently. "I need to. A beat." Later, they told me I owed them. For the enlightenment, for the food, for the coaching. They said my debt had tripled, that I could work it off in the network, that I was an asset now. Daniel swallowed. Work how? They called it logistics. Moving goods, managing rooms, sometimes hosting clients. But you don't get to say no. Not really. You just learned to act like you did. She rubbed her wrists unconsciously. The threats were subtle at first. Then they weren't. They had my photos, my ID, my passwords. They said they'd leak everything, that my parents would be ashamed, that no one would believe me if I ever got out, that I wasn't even real anymore. A silence. Then she whispered, I believe them. The van slowed near a checkpoint, but Suarez flashed a card and waved them through. Hannah didn't even flinch. I remember looking in the mirror one day, she said more to herself than to anyone. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair was filthy. Her lips cracked. Her teeth clenched like she hadn't spoken her own truth in months. She smiled barely. She asked me, are you still in there? No one answered that voice. Not then. Then Hannah looked up, eyes raw but lucid now. There were nights I thought I'd already died. That maybe I was just a memory walking around in a body no one wanted. But there was one thing that held me. She touched her chest lightly. My dad's voice. Daniel turned away. He used to say, Hannah, you are light. You don't have to reflect anyone else's shadow to prove it. Her eyes filled. I heard that. Every night. Like a rope in the dark. She exhaled, and I followed it. Silence blanketed the van. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, pale orange, delicate, unreal. But inside, a different light was blooming. And Hannah, she was finally stepping into it. The wheels touched down just after midnight. Rain glazed the tarmac, and the city lights of Los Angeles flickered in the mist like tired stars. The plane taxied slowly, a ghost returning to the world of the living. Hannah Kobayashi sat in seat 12. Her body still, but her mind pulsing in every direction. She hadn't slept since the rescue. Not really. There were dozes, brief disconnections, but no real rest. Her body didn't trust rest yet. The plane door opened with a hiss. A flight attendant offered her a soft, awkward smile. She didn't return it. She stepped out alone. No signs, no cameras, no waiting arms. Just a lone TSA agent watching from behind the glass. Daniel and Emiko had flown back to Maui 2 days prior per the advice of the counselor, who told them, she'll need space before she can need people. So Hannah walked the jet bridge in silence. The arrivals terminal was different now. Colder. Like a museum of a life she no longer belonged to. Her footsteps echoed louder than she remembered. Outside, a government vehicle waited, anonymous, gray, idling. A woman in a beige jacket opened the door without speaking. Hannah slid into the back seat. The woman drove without asking questions. The silence wasn't tense. It was clinical. They dropped her off at a halfway facility in Glendale, brick walls, one oak tree and front windows that didn't open. Inside, a young social worker handed her a welcome kit toothpaste, a notebook, socks, a single granola bar. Her room was small, bed lamp desk. The air smelled faintly of sanitizer and warm paper. That first night, Hannah didn't unpack. She pulled the chair to the window and stared at her reflection until it vanished in the dawn light. 2 days later, she boarded a flight to Maui. She didn't speak on the plane, didn't eat. When she landed, no reporters waited, no fanfare, just the hush of humidity and the distant murmur of waves. The car ride to the cemetery was wordless. She carried a single photograph in her hand the entire time. The same photo Ryan had been holding when they found him, her age 7 on Lahaina Beach, arms wide to the wind. At the cemetery, the gravestone was modest. No angels, no etched images, just a simple inscription carved into gray stone. Ryan Kobayashi, 1959, 2024. He never stopped looking. She stood in front of it for almost 30 minutes before she said anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was gravel and glass. I told them I was dead. I told the world not to look. But you didn't believe me. You saw through what they made of me. You saw me even when I couldn't. She knelt gently, placing the photo at the base of the grave. I don't know how to live with what happened. I don't know how to fix it. But I know I can't waste what you gave. She stood. You died trying to save me. So I'll live trying to become worth saving. That night back at her childhood home, she didn't sleep in her old bed. She slept on the floor of the dark room Ryan had built in the garage. The smell of developers still lingered. It was the only place she felt real. Weeks passed. Hannah didn't vanish this time. She entered therapy. Not the soft kind. Not the talk about your day kind. The kind that cracked your ribs open and made you stare at what was hiding inside. PTSD, complex trauma, dissociation, depression, survivor's guilt. Her diagnosis filled 5 pages. But she still showed up. Every morning. She attended physical therapy too. After months of sleep deprivation and malnutrition, her joints ached, her balance faltered. The first week she fell 3 times during core strengthening. She didn't quit. In the evenings she wrote, pages and pages, not about the cult, not about the men, about her father. She wrote about the time he burned pancakes, but pretended it was a new recipe. She wrote about how he used to sing Motown classics off-key. She wrote about how he once spent 3 hours helping her photograph a praying mantis on a hibiscus petal. She wrote until her hands cramped and her vision blurred. She drew too. The first image she finished was of her father's back, walking ahead of her on a beach camera slung over one shoulder, looking over his shoulder just once, as if making sure she was still behind him. She hung the drawing above her bed in the halfway house. Every day she looked at it before she opened the door. After a month, she made her first video. She sat in front of a window in a simple white t-shirt. No makeup, no script, just her raw. She pressed record. My name is Hannah Kobayashi. I disappeared in November of 2024. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I was manipulated, gaslit, rewritten. They took my voice and used it against me. They said I was broken, but I wasn't. I was buried. My father died trying to prove I was still worth finding. She swallowed, then stared into the lens. He was right. Fade to black. Then a single line of white text. Healing is not the absence of pain. It's learning to walk beside it. And from there, her real work began. She never intended to become a spokesperson. Hannah Kobayashi had spent months avoiding the word survivor, sidestepping interviews, and politely declining every major outlet that asked for an exclusive. She didn't want her pain turned into content. She didn't want her father's death flattened into a headline. But what she did want, what she needed, was for no one else to vanish the way she had. Not into vans, not into silence, not into systems that knew how to forget. So she built something, quietly, deliberately. She called it the Lightroom Project, a name her father would have appreciated. It began with a single website, black background, white text, no donation button, no dramatic videos. Just one sentence on the home page. For every person told to keep it secret, you are not alone. Then came the stories. Anonymous submissions from women and men across the country. Young, old, educated, undocumented, queer, invisible. People who'd fallen into mentorship programs, enlightenment collectives, financial sovereignty retreats. People who had been manipulated, not through brute force, but through weaponized charm, pseudo-spiritual language, and psychological dismantling dressed up as empowerment. Hannah read every submission. Every single one. And for each one that resonated with her experience, she recorded a short video staring directly into the camera saying only, I believe you. The impact was instant. Messages flooded in. Parents of missing teens, friends of girls who had suddenly changed. Women who had escaped, but couldn't explain how. And fathers, dozens of fathers, old men with lined faces and fractured voices. Men holding up photos from birthdays, graduations, state fairs. Men who had memorized last text messages, last receipts, last known coordinates. Men who, like her father, refused to stop looking, even when everyone else told them it was time to let go. One of them, Luis Romero, 63, from El Paso, sent her a letter, handwritten in blocky English. I am looking for my daughter, Maria. She was told to come to California for a yoga retreat. We never saw her again. They told me she went off-grid. But I see your face, and I know she didn't choose that. Please help me see her again. I am not ready to bury hope. Hannah called him the next morning. They talked for 2 hours. When he cried, she didn't speak. When he apologized for crying, she said, my dad did too. After that, she added a new section to the site father's wall. Dozens of names. Dozens of photos. Each captioned with one line, still searching. She began speaking publicly, small venues first. Libraries, community centers. But it wasn't long before schools invited her. High schools. Youth programs. Places where vulnerability still looked like rebellion and where secrets felt like currency. At Roosevelt High in Los Angeles, she stood in front of 120 juniors and seniors, hands shaking only slightly. She began not with stats or warnings, but with a confession. I thought I was too smart to get caught. I thought if someone ever tried to manipulate me, I'd spot it. But the truth is, you don't always know it's a trap until you've already thanked them for building it. She paced slowly, deliberate. The most dangerous people I met didn't use chains. They used compliments. They used attention. They used your dreams against you. She paused, then quieter. If anyone ever asks you to keep a secret from your family, run. If they say your parents don't get it, or that you're different, you're special, they're just holding you back, run. They're not empowering you. They're isolating you. Silence filled the room, and then hands, questions, dozens. How do you know it's not real? What if they're right, and your parents don't understand? What if you've already said yes to something you didn't understand? She answered everyone. Not with fear, but with truth. Raw, bleeding, clear. After the session, a line formed. Students wanting to say thank you, wanting to hug her, wanting to show her their art, their scars, their journals. One girl, maybe 16, with chipped nail polish and a defiant expression, approached last. She didn't say a word. She just handed Hannah a folded piece of paper. Inside was a photo, a man in a baseball cap holding up a handmade sign that read, "Where are you, Rosie?" Hannah blinked. The girl said quietly, "That's my dad. He's still looking. I don't talk to him much. But after today, maybe I will." And in that moment, something inside Hannah shifted. Her lips pulled into a smile, not polite, not performative, not the hollow smile of someone doing what's expected. A real smile, the kind she thought she'd never find again. Later that night, she sat by her window watching the streetlights flicker. She opened her notebook and drew something simple. A girl standing at the edge of a cliff, a beam of light reaching down toward her hand. Underneath it, she wrote, "He caught the darkness for me, so I could carry the light for them." And she kept writing. The sun was dying again over Maui. It did that every evening, faded like a whispered name across the horizon. But today, it felt different, more familiar, more final. The beach hadn't changed. Same jagged rocks, same salt-cracked shoreline, same whispering palms leaning into the wind like they were listening for something just beyond hearing. The tide rolled in steady, rhythmical reverent. The sky above stretched into molten gold smudged with lavender and blood orange, a palette Hannah once tried to replicate in her editing software and never quite could. She stood barefoot in the wet sand the same way she had years ago, when her father first put a camera in her hands and said, "Don't just capture the light. Wait for it to speak." Now that same camera was in her grip, his old Olympus-worn leather strap soft, with years of sun and sweat and story. It had taken her months to touch it again. And when she finally did, she didn't lift it to her eye. Not right away. She held it gently like something fragile, like it might still carry the last fingerprints of the man who'd taught her to see the world not just for what it was, but for what it was becoming. The waves kissed the edge of her toes. She closed her eyes and let the wind push through her. When she opened them, she raised the camera. Not to shoot, not yet. Just to feel it there, to feel him there. The viewfinder was cracked slightly. He'd dropped it once during a wedding shoot and never got it fixed. Said it added character. That flaw was still there, still his, still hers. She turned slowly, facing the west. The ocean shimmered with fire and silence. And then she lifted the lens, pressed the shutter, once, twice, a third time, and her hand began to tremble. She lowered the camera. Tears welled up uninvited, but honest, spilling onto her cheeks, the salt indistinguishable from the sea breeze. But her eyes, though, stayed open. They didn't close from pain or fear or grief. They stared straight ahead, unblinking, catching every drop of light, as if reclaiming every second she had lost in the dark. Behind her, the world was turning. But in front of her, the moment stood still. She whispered, "I'm not a victim." Her voice didn't crack. It rang. "I'm a survivor." She blinked slowly, then looked into the lens, into his lens. And my father, he was a hero in the dark. Then she clicked the shutter one last time. It echoed soft and absolute over the ocean. That night, she uploaded the photo. No caption, just the image. Her silhouette backlit by a burning sun standing alone. At the edge of the water, the camera dangling from her neck like a compass she had finally learned how to use again. Within an hour, thousands shared it. Tens of thousands. The image rippled across timelines, message boards, search engine pages. And then at the bottom of her website, in bold white type on a black screen, the words appeared. "Over 25,000 Americans go missing every year. Don't let their names fade." A link followed. Submit a name. Tell their story. Keep the light on. She closed the laptop and stepped out into the night. Overhead stars were blooming. And in the hush between waves, she could almost hear it. His voice somewhere in the wind. Still watching. Still waiting. Still proud.